So today we're going to look into Parashat Toledot. This class is going to be for Refuah Shlema of Sarah Bat Simcha and Yehudit Rachma Bat Camille and everyone who needs Refuah B'ezrat Hashem. Okay, so I want to look deeply. There's a lot of interesting things going on in this parasha. There's a lot of things that that deserve attention. So I chose to sort of hopefully zone in on one. Well, not really one, a few, but a main idea. So I want to look at the character of Rivka Imenu and sort of analyze and try to understand a little bit her marriage with Yitzchak and her role as mother and how this all plays in to her character and her development as being in the chain of transmitting Abraham's mission and the Brit, Abraham and Sarah's mission and the Brit, one more link in the chain. So what's her, like, how she's significant in that role. We spoke about her last week in Parashat Chayei Sarah. We spoke about her in regards to her chesed and her connection to Sarah Imenu. We did that, but now I want to look at it more from the lens of her marriage and her role as mother. So the first thing we see is we meet her / hear about her last week. 2 weeks ago, after the Akedah, right? We hear that Abraham. It says that Abraham hears that she was born, right? That this woman was born into his family, and we hear about her birth. So the Midrash tells us that she was actually born at the time of Yitzchak being on the Mizbeach in the Akedah. So whether, obviously, it doesn't necessarily need to be true that she was actually, born on that moment, but what is the significance of saying that is that it seems that the Midrash is trying to show us that she was sort of created with this role of being a partner with Yitzchak in this mission of Brit with God, to continue that. And when Yitzchak was at his sort of height of his connection with God by his willingness to participate in the Akedah, right? We sort of overlook that a lot of times, is that Yitzchak, we sort of sometimes it's sort of portrayed that he was a child and he was going unwillingly, but he was actually an adult. The Hamim say he was in his 30s. He was an adult. And he fully well knew what was happening. And because of his connection to God and his commitment to God, he was willing to go along with this, which is a little bit crazy to think. So the Midrash is sort of saying that when Yitzchak was getting, his close connection with God, his partner in his mission towards bringing God into this world was born and was, sort of connected to him. And we see that it's an interesting idea to take for marriage, but also for any relationship in your life, that when you have when you're doing what you feel, what you love, what you feel committed to, what you are quote unquote meant to be doing, then you'll attract the positive people that will help you move forward in your life. That may that be a spouse, may that be a business partner, may that be a very good friend, right? So when you're working in a way that's helping you better yourself, you're going to attract and connect to people that are going to help you do that. Okay. Obviously, you're not going to necessarily get connected to people, that are going to help you build yourself if you're sitting on your couch, right? If you're going out and help and doing chesed and doing positive things into the world. Whether that be in terms of your relationships with people, whether that be in terms of the community, into the world, you're going to end up connecting with people to help you move forward in that. So I think that's sort of the message that the Midrash is trying to say with that, is that the more you try to actualize your own potential and your own goals, is the fact when you're going to be able to attract and connect to the right people to help you do that. So in connection, to move on from that, but to connect it, there's another midrash that talks about the fact that when Adam and Chava, so to speak, got married, right? When God put them together, it says, the midrash says that God and the Melachim went to Gomel Chesed to Adam and Chava on their wedding, and it's very interesting. Why the Hachamim painting a marriage as a Chesed, right? So if we look at the line in Tehillim of Olam Chesed Yibaneh, that you're building a world of chesed, that when a marriage takes place, you're essentially building a new world, right? You're taking two completely individual people with their own strengths and their own achievements and their own likes and dislikes and everything like that, and you're creating something new with their union. And you're taking the individual characteristic traits and building them as something as together. And this is like Gestalt psychology, where it says like the sum is greater than the whole of its part. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So meaning even if that when you create a new whole, it's even greater than each individual part. And that again, that connects to the qualities of a marriage relationship, or also a important friendship, or a teacher-student relationship. That if you're fully investing in the positives of each individual in the relationship, you're going to be able to build something new, even greater than you could have individually. And this idea of building a new world is even more even more applicable when we're thinking about the avot and imahot, that are the paradigms to building the nation, right? So it's not only about their individual relationship, it's about what their individual relationship gives and represents to our nation. So let's go back for a second to Yitzhak and Rivka. And there's two unique things. There's a few, but there's two that I want to focus on about that I think are unique to Yitzhak and Rivka's relationship, that is different than the other Avot and Imahot. And one of those is that he doesn't take an additional wife. Abraham takes Hagar, right? Yaakov takes obviously Leah and Rachel, but he also takes Bilhah and Zilpah. He has many wives, right? Yitzhak is the only one that has one wife throughout his whole life. And I want to talk about that in a minute. And we also see that Rivka is less assertive and does not communicate with her husband as much as the other imahot do. And she's more, she does things more discreetly and more in a way. It has a negative connotation, manipulatively, but she's doing it without being direct with Yitzhak. So I want to talk about those two things and what those show. So first, just to contrast it, we see that that Sarah is very strong in her relationship with Abraham, a very strong presence and personality, and she basically tells Abraham, you take Hagar as a second wife. She orchestrates that whole thing. And then fast forward, when she's not happy with how that turned out, she tells him, you need to kick them out. And God tells him, yes, you do. So you see the strength of Sarah in their relationship. And we also see with Rivka how she takes Yaakov to task, and she goes to him when she's akarat. She goes, Hava li banim im ayin ali meta, right? She tells him, give me children or it's like I'm dead. And he answers her not in the nicest way, but that's for another time. But my point is that the Sarah and Rivka were very, very assertive and strong, and Rivka was not. She did initiate and move a lot of things, but not in connection to him. And we see that from the very beginning, Yitzhak, Rivka did not feel as an equal to Yitzhak as the other imahot did. Also, a little bit we see this with Leah, but for different reasons that I don't want to go into now. But Rivka, we see that from the minute she sees him, right, when she's coming in last week when we meet her, and she's coming in on the with Eliezer and she sees him in the field, and she immediately falls off the camel and covers herself with a scarf out of fear, with her seif. Remember that seif scarf, and this seif, this metaphorical seif, doesn't come off throughout their marriage. There's always sort of this barrier between them, and a lack of being able to fully communicate with him. And we see this in a few places. We see this when she doesn't know what's going on when she's pregnant, and she goes to she goes with Droshet Hashem, excuse me, to find out what's going on. And she gets a nevuah of Harav Yavod Sa'id. She never tells that to Yitzhak. She keeps that, for 30 some odd years, that even her whole life, so to speak, that she doesn't tell him that really the nevuah was that Yaakov's going to be the chosen one, not Esau. And even when she sees that she has to step in and make sure that Yitzhak doesn't make the mistake of blessing Esau instead of Yaakov, you would think she doesn't just go up to him and say, Yitzhak, listen, first of all, she could even say without the nivua, she could say, I think, these are the reasons why it makes sense for you to bless Yitzchak and not Yaakov and not Esav. And she could even add the idea of the nivua, but she doesn't do any of that. She orchestrates this whole elaborate plan instead of communicating with her husband. And it's interesting. I actually listened to a series on Aleph Bet, highly recommended by Rabbi Froman. And he speaks about, I'm not going to go through the whole series, I'll just sort of give the little punchline so you could go, if you want, listen to it yourself. But basically, he has this whole theory that he explains in his series that that Rivka was not trying to deceive Yitzchak. She was instead trying to transform Yaakov into being worthy of these berachot. So he has a very interesting perspective, but which I again recommend going to listen to. However, according to Psha, it seems more that she's not communicating with him the way that she should be doing. And she also doesn't tell him, if you skip to the end of the story, after the brachot, when she hears that Esav wants to kill him, and she's worried about his life, and she tells Yaakov to run away, she doesn't tell Yitzchak that reason. She doesn't tell Yitzchak, Esav wants to kill Yaakov, he has to go away. No, she says it that I wanted to find a wife in Haran by my family, and he should go there to find a wife, under the guise, so to speak, of getting the right partner. And here it's a little less problematic than the brachot, because it's not that that's not true. She does want him to go find a wife from her family, and she is. It says that the wives from Canaan that Esav took were morat ruach. They were for la vivlema. It was a disgust to the parents. So it wasn't that was not wrong. It was just she kept the other reason concealed the other reason as well. Again, she wasn't fully open with him, and so with this all being said, I want to go back now to the idea of the fact that she was his only wife, and I think this sort of connects, is that Yitzchak, it says that he loved her, right, and he saw her as his one true partner, and I think you could look at the fact that, this is my interpretation, so take it or leave it, but I think that because of what Yitzchak saw with his relationship with his parents and Ishmael and Hagar, he didn't want to repeat that. And he wanted to make sure that all his children were biologically from him and his partner, his chosen wife, that he felt was going to commit to him into the goal of bringing Abraham's brit with God into the world, and we see this in a way that even when it seems that Yitzchak, even though he wanted to bless Esav, it doesn't seem, if you look at it a little closely, it doesn't seem he was ever going to fully give him the beracha of Abraham, of the zera and the aretz and the brit with Abraham, because he gives, thinking it's Esav, he gives Yaakov the beracha, and for the land and all good things, but he doesn't fully give the beracha of Abraham till after, when it's revealed to him what happened and everything is cleared up. He says, not only does he say Gam Baruch Yeh to Yitzchak about Yaakov, but he also then gives Yaakov the blessing of Abraham. So we see that this is very similar also. When he gives him this bracha of Abraham, he tells Yaakov this is when he also tells Yaakov to go to Haran and find a wife from the family of his mother, of Rivka's family, and to not take a woman from the Benot Canaan. And it sounds very similar to what Abraham told Eliezer when he sent him to find a wife for Yitzchak. And we see that even though they both agree to send Yaakov away, they both have sort of, Yitzchak and Rivka have different motives, and they're not fully communicated. So I want to take a second to look at a different story, and hopefully that has similarities to this, and hopefully through that story bring out insight to both stories. Okay, so let's fast forward a minute to in Parashat Vayeshev in a couple weeks, and we see an interesting story about Yehuda, Yaakov's son, right? And Yehuda goes, and after the selling of Yosef, right, they have the whole Mechirat Yosef, And Yehuda, it says, "Vayired Yehuda me'et Echav." He lowers himself. He leaves his brothers, and Yehuda goes. And what he does is interesting. Is he marries a Canaanite woman, Isha Kanaanit, Bat Shua, right? Someone Bat Shua. He marries her, and this is the exact thing that his great grandfather Abraham and his father and his grandfather Yitzchak told their children not to do. And we see that these sons from his Canaanite wife, at least the first two, he has three sons. He has Er, Onan, and Shelah. And Er, we see it says he did Ra ben Hashem. It doesn't specify what he does, and he dies. He does some Ra ben Hashem. He's bad, and he dies. The second son is told to marry the wife Tamar, right? His brother's widow Tamar, and it says that he did not want to have Zerah, to have children with her, because he didn't want to bring children up in the name of his brother. He didn't want to give his brother Zerah. So this it's again, it says Ra ben Hashem. So this is interesting because we see the Isha Kanaanit. Apparently, this is showing that Abraham and Yitzchak were justified in requesting women that weren't from Canaan, because this wife, sort of seems to taint these children, and they're Ra ben Hashem, and they don't want Zera, right? They don't want the continuity of a family of responsibility. They don't want that, and we see that Tamar, the widow of his two children, right, of Er and then Onan. Now she is waiting for Shelah, the third son. He tells her, wait till he gets a little older and then he'll marry you and have children to bring up the family name, because that was the common practice of Yibum at the time, that if someone passed away, a husband died without children, then one of their relatives would marry the wife to bring in continuity of the family. And so Tamar is waiting for Shelah, and the narrator, the text tells us that Yehuda really had no intention of giving her Shelah. He thought she was some sort of black widow, some sort of bad luck, and he didn't want his third son to die because of her. He apparently didn't know that his sons were being evil, being Ra ben Hashem. So what does Tamar do? She decides, like Rivka, but differently, but we'll see, to take matters into her own hands. She decides, she hears that Yehuda is coming down to do the sheep shearing party, and she takes off Bigdei Ameluta, right? She changes her clothes the same way Rivka told Yaakov to change his clothes to the clothes of Esav, right? So we have this changing of clothes, this clothes being connected to identity. So she changes her Bigdei Almana, her widow's clothing, and puts on different clothing, and then she covers herself with a seif, the same idea of seif that Rivka covered herself with when she saw Yitzchak. And she goes and pretends to be a prostitute, so that and entices Yehuda to sleep with her, so that she will get pregnant and have a zera from that family to continue the family. Now it's interesting that the payment that she asks for, or that he offers, is shnei gedei ezim, two kid goats. And that is the same thing that Rivka tells Yaakov to get, that she could to go get for her to cook for Yitzchak when getting the bracha. So we see a lot of similarities here. And then we see something that's similar, but also a little nuanced, is that she too gets pregnant with twins. And when Rivka has Yaakov and Esav, we see that Yaakov was called Yaakov because he was holding the heel, the ekev of Esav, right? And gets his name because of that, and his identity, so to speak, because of that. And even Esav says that Yaakov holds him back, right? And here we see sort of the opposite, is that when she's giving birth, one of them pushes out the hand, and the midwife wraps a string around his hand, and then the other one's born first. And because he was the first one to come out, so to speak, he was the Bechor, and they call him Peretz because he, pushed through Lifrotz. He pushed through before the brother. So he also gets his name from an incident in birth. However, these two things are different because the seif, the scarf that Tamar puts, is different than the seif that Rivka puts. Rivka puts a seif as a reaction, as a response to fear and uncertainty and a lack of confidence almost, and not sure of their relationship. And Tamar is doing the exact opposite. She's taking initiative with this seif, with this with this change of clothes. And in terms of Yaakov and Peretz, we also see they have opposite meaning, so to speak. And then it's interesting that in both the summary, the end of both of these stories, the person that was, so to speak, deceived realizes and accepts fully the act of of deception. What do I mean? Yitzchak, even after he realizes that Yaakov tricked him and it wasn't Esav that he gave the bracha to, he says, Gam Baruch Iyeh, right? He says that even though it was given, I wasn't realizing who I was giving it to, the bracha stands, and I give Yaakov that bracha. And Yehuda, after he finds out that his daughter-in-law got pregnant, and she says, and they're trying to figure out who the father is, and she said, whoever has, this staff is the father, and this the signet ring, and he realizes it's him, and he says, Sadekahi mimeni. He says what you did was right and I was wrong by not perpetuating the zera and giving you shelah. So you had, he agrees to the fact that she had to take matters into her own hands because he didn't do what was right. And we see what's interesting is that these two acts of deception lead to a level of chosenness, right? Yaakov's deception, Yaakov and Rivka's deception leads to Yaakov being the one that's chosen to continue the legacy of Abraham. And Peretz, right, which was a result of the deception of Tamar, in a way brings this all to fruition because he is the ancestor of the Malchut of David, right? We see in the lineage in the Megillat Ruth when it talks about the lineage and who's how the Malchut of David starts. It's from Yehuda and Peretz, and that he was the one who led to the Malchut. So it's very interesting to see that the idea of Malchut and the idea of what's the word, of unity and of bringing a nation to its mission comes out from this little bit of deception. And speaking of the fact that this is brought up in Megillat Ruth, I think Ruth, she brings this full circle. What do I mean? Ruth, right, Rivka and Tamar had to deceive the men in their life to get the outcome that was needed. They had to do it in a sort of backhanded way. And Ruth does the opposite, so to speak. She does it in a way where she makes it very open and very clear to Boaz that she's the one he needs to marry. She does this by her acts of chesed to Naomi. And when he hears the way she acted toward Naomi and her relationship with Naomi, and he realizes that she's a close relative and that her husband died and that he needs to redeem her and bring Zerah to the family, she doesn't have to do it in any sneaky way or any backhanded way. She does it very clearly and letting him realize that through chesed. So it's interesting also, going back to the idea of chesed, of Rivka was chosen because of her chesed, right? So here too, Ruth was also chosen because of her chesed. And another thing we see a similarity is that, not a similarity, but a way to wrap this up, so to speak, is that we see Rivka is introduced to us in relationship to zivug, to marriage. Excuse me, that she's the one born, and then we find the whole marriage story where she's chosen for Yitzchak. And she also ends the the last we see her is when she talks about the marriage and the zivug of her own son Yaakov going to get married and continue this chain. So through this we see how crucial Rivka was as a link to this mission of Abraham and Sarah and bringing God into this world and bringing Brit into this world. And the Netziv actually says something very interesting. He says that even though it seems like they didn't have so much of an equal relationship, and she did have this pachad that the other imahot didn't have, she was a true Ezer Kenegdo to Yitzchak. And I think also because of that, this is my interpretation of it, and Steve, but I think because she was such a true Ezer Kenegdo, he didn't take another wife. I think that was one of the other reasons. He saw her as his true equal, his true partner, even though necessarily she might have not seen that in herself. And he says, the Netziv says that the way she was able to do this was that even though she didn't agree with him and she thought that that he should be blessing Yaakov instead of Esav, and she didn't necessarily feel the ability or the way that she could say it outright, she orchestrated a plan in order to make sure her husband didn't do the wrong thing and didn't make a mistake, and he was able to follow the bracha in the way that it should have been. And I think that we can look at this in a way and think about all our relationships in terms of there's some times when you could say things outright and people will take it. But there's other times that things need to be said, but they won't be taken unless it's done in a way that's a little more less obvious, or you have to sort of force them to see it. And I think that that even though Rivka and Tamar ultimately did the right thing, they did it in a little bit of a backhanded way and not upfront, and Ruth did it in a straightforward way. Ideally, everything should be done in the most emet and straightforward way. And that is why, because of this whole incident, we have, Esav Sonet Yaakov, like till now, we have problems with Esav. And it's interesting because we see that even though Yaakov was chosen for the Berachat of Abraham, Esav has a very important role also. He gets blessed, right? Ishmael, it's interesting to note that Ishmael, he's sent away. He doesn't get blessed. I mean, God tells him you're going to have a nation, but he doesn't get blessed in the sense of that he's going to be a part of this. And Esav, in a way, he might have more of a minor part, but he has a part. And it says that if we're able to work, Israel and Esav together, that's the ideal, right? That's the ideal. And so ideally, we should do everything straightforward and everything should be open. But in certain situations present themselves, one party has to be, forced to open their eyes more clearly. Then, maybe there are certain things that can be done in the right way to do that. So I think that we have to, I think what we could take from this is to try to allow ourselves as individuals to be open and ready to hear things that need to be said and need to be heard in a straightforward way, and not to need any manipulation or backhandedness. So I think that I think that through the relationship with Rivka and Yitzchak, we see that, and also with Tamar and Ruth, and it all leads to being chosen and malchut. So next week we'll talk more about Yaakov himself and his whole journey, and hope to see you. Thanks.